Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to extend a very warm welcome to each one of you at the nice global conclave from the labs of the beautiful Himalayas, where the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is located. The think tank was established in the month of February in the year 2016. It undertakes independent research in the field of international relations, foreign policy, security studies, and development. NICE has 4 research centers: China Studies, Neighborhood Studies, Non-Traditional Security Studies, and Security and Strategic Studies. The institute focuses on 8 research topics: climate change and energy, global governance, sustainable development and smart cities, refugee and migration, China's Belt and Road Initiative, border and transboundary water politics, Indo-Pacific affairs, disaster management, and international economy and development. Previously, NICE has had the opportunity to host distinguished speakers from all around the globe.
It was a great pleasure inviting me to speak here at NICE.
It's a real pleasure to be able to speak with all of you.
Well, thank you anyway, and I certainly admire the work that you're doing.
I'm very happy to be with you all.
NICE Global Conclave is the flagship event of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement. The theme of the 3-day conference is Connecting Nepal to the World, with the aim to bring the leaders, diplomats, business leaders, and scholars from all around the globe. The objective of the conclave is to introduce Nepal to the world and at the same time update the Nepalese policy makers and experts about the fast-changing geopolitics, which will help Nepal reshape its foreign policy to achieve its national goal. This is the session L of the conference, titled Non-Traditional Security Issues. And to chair and moderate this session, it's a real pleasure to have Dr. Jirayudh Sinthuphan. Dr. Jirayudh Sinthuphan is the Director of South Asia Research Center and a lecturer in Communication Arts at Chulalongkorn University. He is an editor of Mapping Migration, Culture and Identity in the Indian Diasporas in Southeast Asia and the UK, published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing. He is also leading a research consortium on social innovation for sustainable and livable ASEAN cities, and on extremism in South and Southeast Asia. Without any further ado, I request the session to take over.
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone, distinguished guests and distinguished speakers. It is my pleasure, to be invited to chair this sessions, which is the issue that is close to my heart. The issues of non-traditional securities. Today we have very esteemed speakers. The first one is Dr. Jyoti Pathania. She's a research fellow at the Center of Land Warfare Studies. Second one is Dr. Medha Bisht, who is a senior assistant professor at the Department of International Relations, South Asian University. And the third one is Dr. Aslam Khan. I'm sorry, I haven't got your information because my information is still, the old one. And you probably introduce yourself, later. And the third speaker is Dr. Chandra Lavande, who is a program coordinator at the Community Development Programs, Kathmandu University. And the last speaker is Professor Dr. Nivedita Das Kundu, who is the president of Bharat Center of Canada and faculty at the York University. So in the first round, I would like to give each of our speakers about 9 to 10 minutes each to speak in what you have prepared, and then after that we will receive the questions from the floors. So please, Dr. Jyoti, would you like to go ahead first?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Am I audible? Okay. Thank you, Nice, for having given me this wonderful opportunity to speak on a topic which is of close interest to me, and that is the conceptual underpinnings, the conceptual understanding of non-traditional security as an approach in international relations. So to begin with, I just want to say that the whole concept of reconceptualization of security became necessary because of the gradual fundamental changes in the international system. And as you all know, I don't have to tell you that some of the prime factors which necessitated new thinking on the concept and scope of security studies was the demise of Cold War, which led to a globally interdependent world, and of course, the change in the nature of warfare, which included the struggle for technological, economic superiority, political and cultural space, rather than pure conventional military might. States today are more than ever dependent on international society and institutions. Our own century has seen a rise and prominence of non-traditional security issues, be it related to the climate change, natural disasters, or the ongoing pandemic. So what is the genesis of non-traditional thinking? Well, the genealogy of the idea can be traced to, if not traced back to, the growing dissatisfaction with the prevailing notions of development and security in the 60s, in the 70s, and in the 80s. In the middle of the 70s, the home of security studies and international relations, the multinational World Order Model Project, launched an ambitious effort to construct a more stable and just world order. But nothing was of much avail. It was, in fact, in my study and research, I found that the most important forerunners of non-traditional security were a series of series of multinational independent commissions, which were composed of prominent leaders, intellectuals, and academicians. And this was beginning in the 70s with the Club of Rome group, known as the World Problematique. This report noted that every person in the world faces a series of pressures and problems that require attention and action. But mind you, it was only in the 1980s with two independent commissions which contributed to a change in thinking of development and security. So what were these two independent commissions? The first was the Independent Commission on International Development Issues, chaired by Willy Brandt in 1980, called the North-South Report. Now, this report not only raised traditional security issues like peace and war, but also issues like how to overcome world hunger, mass misery, alarming disparities between living conditions of rich and poor. The second Independent Commission of 1980 was chaired by Olof Palme. It was the Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues, famously called as the Common Security Report. This report also drew attention to alternative ways of thinking about peace and security. It acknowledged that common security requires people to live in peace and dignity, and that they have enough to eat and can find work and live in a world without poverty and destitution. 1991, the Stockholm Initiative on Global Security and Governance issued a call for common responsibility in the 1990s, which referred to challenges to security other than political rivalry and armaments, to include environment degradation, excessive population growth, and movement and lack of progress towards democracy. But let me tell you, it was the first explicit document the first explicit document where the mention of the term human security and other important elements of non-traditional security was laid out in the UNDP report of 1994. And of course, needn't I say that the report was written by Mehboob-ul Haq. He was the main person behind this report. And what did he say? He fashioned a new concept, and he says security reflects in the lives of our people, not in the weapons of our country. He said fundamentally human security will be achieved not through arms and ammunitions, but through development. So the UNDP's Human Development Report of 1994 redefined the concept of security by giving it a human dimension. The human dimension, in fact, he nailed 7 different kinds of concepts with regard to security. And those 7 were economic security, food security, environment security, personal security, community security, and what I want the august audience to listen to is health security. Yes, health security as well as political security. These were the 7 security variants which the Human Security Report talked about. Now, even the Sustainable Development Goals, also adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015, gave a universal call to action to end poverty and so on and so forth. But how much of it has actually happened is for various countries to see in their own states. So how can we differentiate between traditional and non-traditional security issues? As I told you, the paradigm shift took place, but is there a dividing line between these two? Can we say that these are traditional issues and these are non-traditional security issues? Or there is an inextricably interwoven tie between these two, so much so that they are not mutually exclusive, but they overlap and both of them have linkages. Let me try and give you a brief distinction of the two. The first paradigm, that is a traditional security paradigm, is an orthodox belief in security where the primacy objective is to ensure the survival of the nation state. The second paradigm, that is non-traditional security, is a normative reconceptualization of security where the primary object is to ensure survival of the people. Second distinction, the primary means of defense against the enemy is by use of military means or force, says traditional security. Whereas use of non-state actors, international law, international organization, global governance. Now here, non-state actors are NGOs and not terrorists as non-state actors also could be used in that context. Now, traditional security issues are as old as the state itself, whereas the non-traditional security issues are newer threats to security, which have come up with the urgencies of the post-Cold War era, at least in the theory of IR. Traditional security is more unilateralist and a narrow concept of security. Non-traditional security is multilateralist and a broad concept based of security. Traditional threats largely originate from the state itself, whereas in non-traditional security, non-military threats largely originate from transnational actors like crime groups, terrorists, and even pandemics, which don't see boundaries. So traditional security paradigm is more realist theory oriented and non-traditional security is more liberal theory oriented. And as I told you, these two paradigms are not divided by a dividing line. They are mutually exclusive, they overlap and have linkages with both. Addressing the non-traditional security issues has become the urgent need of our times, as many of these issues are beyond the capacity of the individual states to tackle alone. So there does exist an increasing interdependence of both traditional and non-traditional security issues. For instance, an increase in the environment of traditional non-state actors, not as emerging security threat, but as established security threat, example, Al-Qaeda. Such non-traditional security threats have potential to destabilize the world and reverse the decades of hard work in social and economic sectors. Another case to point is the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So non-military threats and such issues should be included in our national policy framework. Another recommendation could be that we have to realize that if we do not include them in our policies, the chances of survival for our future generations would be bleak, given the extent of damage already caused and continuing to our habitat, Mother Earth. The transnational character of such issues needs to be addressed and internalized promptly by all researchers, scholars, and policymakers. One of the famous political scientists, he argues that a pluralistic coexistence of different concepts of security by the name of comprehensive security is the need of the hour. The nations must look beyond conventional military security threats and address the non-traditional security issues in order to have a stable, comprehensive, and holistic security. The sooner our region realizes this, the better it will be for our future generations. Comprehensive security covering the non-traditional security dimension is the urgent need which needs to be formulated and strengthened for the progress, development, and survival of the complete world, including the South Asian region. All of South Asian countries fared poorly in the 2020 World Risk Index on strengthening their abilities to prepare and adapt to extreme events. In fact, number of non-traditional security issues, including food, energy, water nexus, climate change, transnational crime, terrorism, disaster relief, economic performance, they're all interconnected challenges, mind you, inclusive of the health and security needs. So there needs to be a study and there needs to be an implementation of non-traditional security issues in the governmental policies, and South Asia should take the lead in that. There has been a lack of long-term energy planning, not only in South Asian countries, but on the world over. Over the past 25 years also, natural disasters and environmental degradations have killed nearly 500,000 people in South Asia. I think this is one of the areas where the countries of South Asia can start the lead. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Jyoti, for giving us such a comprehensive and very strong foundations of what non-traditional security issues is. And I like the fact that you stress that we shouldn't take a simplistic view that traditional security threat and non-traditional security threats are separate entities, but are actually interconnected, and we should think we should think of them as a thing that we have to tackle at the same times. So for our next speakers, I invite Dr. Medha Bisht to express her view and provide us with more information about the issues. Dr. Medha, are you ready?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So greetings of the day. And in fact, to be here, I would in fact like to thank NICE to invite me as a speaker in this very important forum. There is a lot of exchange of ideas happening right now. I have myself logged in to a few sessions. I can see that new ideas, research is being shared, and I do hope that this virtual space that NICE has provided under the leadership of Dr. Pramod facilitates the meeting of minds, and that I think is particularly needed when we are situated in South Asia. So, well, the broader theme that, as you all know, I would be talking about is non-traditional security issues. And I thought that rather than taking a specific case like my previous speaker, say, for instance, on energy security or water security, which of course are important themes to dwell on, to focus on, I will perhaps speak on the larger theme of non-traditional security, revisit this theme, and present to you an alternative way of approaching it. Now, let me mention here at the outset that the inspiration for some of these thoughts primarily comes from my own research on non-Western epistemologies, which I would say is a different way of understanding phenomena, different way of understanding the reality outside. And based on this understanding, I argue, as the previous speaker did, that the division between traditional and non-traditional is rather flawed. In fact, if one really looks at the intellectual legacies of South Asia, there is, in fact, a very different cosmovision that comes to the fore. And this cosmovision, I would argue, stems from a more holistic, a more composite, a more relational understanding of how we see or the intellectual legacies or the South Asian thought per se. So it's again this backdrop that I would argue that differentiating traditional from non-traditional security is somewhat alien to non-Western thought. In other words, what I'm really trying to say that security, development, micro and macro narratives were always interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent on each other. There was always an attempt to really approach phenomena in a comprehensive and a holistic manner. So to treat water security separately from national security, or energy security separate from economic or ecological, environmental security, I would say could be a misleading way to approach these very complex, wicked problems, as they're called, as we witness them in the 21st century. So in order to make myself clear, I shall, in fact, pick up two examples to perhaps develop this theme further. My first example is from the ancient text called Arthashastra, which we all know was a text on strategy written during the 4th to 2nd century BC. And the second example is primarily drawn from my own engagement in this thought, stemming from the data. And I juxtapose these two narratives for two important reasons. First, I think they can really help us to decolonize knowledge. We all know that non-Western ideas have lacked an agency in defining the character of international relations as a discipline, which was primarily built upon Western experiences and Western philosophical thought. And second, juxtaposing these two narratives also offers a very interesting contrast, but yet a very distinct similarity on the narratives from global South, or I should say from South Asia in particular. This is because both of the narratives that I shall be sharing with you belong to a very different genre altogether. The former, Arthashastra, belongs to the mainstream, often termed as, I would say, quote unquote, Brahmanical elitist tradition. And the other, more or less, is a part of a vernacular, popular, indigenous tradition, which lies really at the margins of South Asian thought. So I picked up on Arthashastra and thought of flagging it out here because it really talks about the very concepts we study as students of international relations today. It talks about power, it talks about morality, it talks about the idea of state and statecraft, it talks about justice, talks about order, so on and so forth. However, the question to my mind is that are these terms similar to how, say, a classical realist like Morgenthau or a structural realist like Kenneth Walls would use them? I have my doubts, as when looking at the vocabularies in Global South or in distinct geocultural spaces, one has to unpack them. Meanings move across geocultural spaces, and we need to recognize this. So, for example, a mere Schirmerian understanding of power will be very different from a Cotelian understanding of power, or how even Sun Tzu would perhaps understand power. We therefore need to understand that vocabularies and terms are packed in a conceptual thicket, and we need to unlayer it by delving deeper into its own distinct intellectual and philosophical leanings. A similar meaning emerges from Arthashastra when we are, say, trying to understand its methodology and its approach to the definition of political. This definition of political is fascinating because it's a pre-Westphalian understanding of political, not really burdened with the idea of nation state. And I would say that this pre-Westphalian understanding of the political did not really look at states as a given, as a black box, which was really obsessed with anarchy and just augmenting power mindlessly. But the understanding primarily stemmed from a more cosmic understanding of dharma, which did not really have a theocratic understanding, but was a fluid interlocutor for translating the meaning of order, the meaning of justice, the meaning of duty, rights, power, state, etc. So this alternative cosmovision makes us familiar to practices of statecraft in early India. So for instance, when Arthashastra talks about power, it is directed towards strengthening the entity we define, say, that as the state. The purpose of state was defined as achieving success, and success was further defined by the happiness of the people. Also, when it came to defining what constitutes an enemy or an ally, both human and non-human elements were taken into consideration, and I think this is important. So for instance, disasters, hazards, famines, floods are considered kantaka, obstacles, by Kautilya. Said are obstacles which weakened the capacity of the state. These are clubbed with factors which actually destabilize a political system. Similarly, in battlefields or in war, when Kautilya talks about power, references are made to terrain, references are made to time, references are made to seasons, which, if employed in a far-sighted and a wise manner, can ensure victory. So if one negates these non-human elements, one is bound to get defeated. The point which I'm really trying to make here is that traditional and non-traditional was not really defined as high politics versus low politics, but was given equal weightage. The focus was on how the macro and the micro were so intertwined and braided with each other that a relational understanding, which is the study of relations, rather than a substantialist understanding, the study of objects like states, was privileged. Now, let me take you to this recent project, where I undertook research on how water was understood by indigenous communities inhabiting the Meghna Basin in Bangladesh-India border. Now, in this project, we as a team of researchers focused on select indigenous communities residing along the Meghna Basin. These were primarily the Khasi community from Meghalaya, Pumai community in Manipur, the Hajong, Khasis, and the Garos located in the Sylhet division of Bangladesh. Now, while we navigated this question at two levels, the empirical and the conceptual level, there were interesting sort of insights similar to my own Kautilyan understanding which emerged. And let me highlight to you a narrative which was shared by an indigenous woman in Bangladesh. And I would like to quote her because I think it's fantastic. It will really be violent for me to not really speak the way she did. Now she says, and I quote here, where there is a forest, there is Khasi people, as our life depends on forest and our livelihood on beetle leaves. Either in Bangladesh or in India, where there is a forest, there is Khasi. Now, these enlightening words were articulated by a woman, as I said, in a small town of Maulazar in the Sylhet division of Bangladesh. And she further said, care of forest means taking care of stones, means taking care of stream, means taking care of trees, and that without stream and water, there would be no trees, and no trees.
Oh, Dr. Mehta, are you still there?
I am there.
Oh, yeah, because we lost you for a couple of seconds. Okay. Can you repeat that, please?
So am I, so where did you lose me? Where did you lose me? I'm sorry.
Yes, well, your voice just got lost for a few seconds. Can you repeat what you said just before that?
Okay, all right. So, what I was doing essentially in the previous few seconds was that I was really trying to communicate this imagery of the ecosystem from the lens of a Khasi indigenous woman who doesn't really see water as separate. In her words, water and the forest were not really separate. Water meant the forest, water meant the sediment, water meant the livelihood. And I would say that these lines are not only instructive of a holistic relational understanding of the environment, which urges us to look at the ecosystem rather than having a compartmentalized approach where we look at energy security, food security, water security, national security, separate through a siloed approach. So what is also instructive here, I would say, is an alternative way of organizing knowledge, thus focusing on ways of knowing, understanding, and viewing the world. And a scholar rightly puts it, that what one really understands from this indigenous thought is an alignment of social, ecological, and spiritual frames, which is indicative of ways through which indigenous communities privilege both human and non-human factors in the environment. In other words, what one can say is that the social, and Bruno Latour has in fact worked on that, the social in indigenous thought includes both human and non-human elements. As for them, the kin or the relatives include the natural elements of the ecosystem. If one looks at the literature, many have started using the term pluriverse instead of universe in terms of understanding alternative thought systems, which need to be included on for understanding the international. And this understanding, I think, needs to be deliberated more by scholars who are interested in making sense of non-Western thought in the theorization and praxis of international relations. And this, to my mind, is important for a post-colonial strategic space like South Asia, which has colonial footprints when it really comes to dealing with complex, non-linear, but also interdependent challenges which we face in the 21st century. So against this backdrop, I assume there are many young minds who are listening to this. I thought of just offering 3 key insights for you to deliberate on. And this is something that I have been investing in for some years now. First, I would like to say that when we think about non-traditional security issues, one needs to go beyond the meta-narrative of water diplomacy or energy diplomacy or energy security or water security. If one really looks at, say, the epics of Mahabharata or classics like Arthashastra, the meta-narrative were braided with the micro-narrative. Unfortunately, in post-colonial spaces like South Asia, our meta-narratives of security and development are quite distant from the micro-realities on the ground. We need to involve and expose ourselves to the field, and our field here, I would say, are not policy speeches and documents and IR theory textbooks, but narratives of the people who experience and live these issues. The first challenge of non-traditional security, therefore, is how do we really bridge the gap and start a conversation between diplomacy and governance. Second, what also merits our attention is to explore what our own intellectual and philosophical South Asian thought has to offer us when we think about the political. Now, there is a rich pedigree when you want to understand the distinct civilizational values and the syncretic thought which emerged here. For instance, what was South Asian, how was South Asian Islam different? What does Buddhist thought has to offer us when we are thinking about conflict transformation? How does Kautilya refer to issues of war and peace? Significantly, if you look at Divyopadesha, written by Prithvinarayan Shah, one really sees how it is adapted to suit foreign policy of small states. What I'm really trying to say here is that understanding social thought in South Asia is equally important. These would give us definitely some strategic insights on how to address complex problems. And lastly, I'll just wind up that third, as we talk about non-traditional security issues, our imagination of South Asia should not be dominated by a territorial Westphalian understanding, which is governed by the idea of a nation state. It is important that we differentiate between an ethnic nation and a civic nation, because only if we do this, we can imagine South Asia differently. We can go beyond the definition of South Asia, not restricting our definition to South Asia just as a collective of states, but rather defining it as a community of through its ecological character, not its border, sovereignty bargains starting point. But through the interdependencies that South Asian states have with each other. Only then, I would say, can policies and cooperation around non-traditional security issues in South Asia, would perhaps be more effective. So I hope I didn't exceed my time limit, but over to you, Chair, now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, just a tiny bit, but thank you very much, for such a rich and thought-provoking thoughts, and I think, later on, we will have, quite a lot of, rich discussions that sprung from it. For our next speakers, may I invite Dr. Aslam Khan, to provide us his view on the issues. Please unmute yourself, sir. Dr. Aslam.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, my sincere thanks to Dr. Pramod, who gave me the opportunity to speak in this important forum. And since last two speakers, they spoke on theoretical aspects and some practical implications of ancient and other kind of the discourses. Here, I am going to take the most important issue in terms of refugee and migration. And since South Asia is badly affecting from the Rohingya issue, so I am just going to take a specific case studies in terms of Rohingya crisis and its emerging security threats to South Asia and responses. And I will also take into consideration the role of United Nations, especially the provision of R2P. So first of all, I should define here what actually the Rohingya crisis is. So Myanmar's Rohingya are among the most persecuted communities in the world, and they denied citizenship rights in Myanmar, and they subject to pervasive discrimination and victims of violent attacks. And majority of Myanmar's Rohingya population were forced to flee the country after the military launched clearance operations in Rakhine state in 2017. And it's bringing the total number of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh to over 900,000, and staying mainly at world's largest and most densely populated refugee camp in southern Bangladesh. And estimated 600,000 Rohingyas who remain in Rakhine state are still subject to severe restrictions on their freedom of movement and other human rights. And nearly 1.1 million of Rohingyas forced to flee in Myanmar that I mentioned after a military crackdown, and UN was forced to say that it is a genocide intent. And some are staying in India and neighboring Bangladesh for years. And close to 40,000 Rohingya, they are living in India, or nearly 15,000, they have received refugee documentation according to the United Nations. So what are the regional challenges and concerns regarding this Rohingya crisis? India and Bangladesh particularly are badly affecting from this Rohingya issue. And Bangladesh, for instance, has set up a massive refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, where the UN High Commissioner for Refugees is involved in their management, and United Nations Human Rights Refugee Commission, they have issued the ID card for refugees so that human rights abuse is minimized. And both India and Bangladesh are not, since I need to mention here, they are not signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention that spells out refugees' rights and makes it a responsibility of the camp country to protect them. So given the stand taken both India and Bangladesh, the future of stranded Rohingya refugees looks unsure. Now, the UN refugee agencies, they had also opposed the kind of treatment given to the Rohingya refugees, and recently the deportation issues on Rohingyas, that they commented the situation in Myanmar is not yet conducive for voluntary return in a safe and secure or a sustainable manner. And returning the child or women to Myanmar may place them at an immediate risk of serious harm. It was a response from the UNHRC, and to responding this kind of the critics for deportation, Indian Home Ministry Kiran Rijiju is the state minister. He said that it is not India is not a signatory for refugees, but India has been very soft on refugee issues, and we will facilitate their return. And the Indian security agency recently detained near about 160 Rohingya refugees from Jammu and Kashmir. That is a very sensitive state in terms of the security. And Bangladesh also, they are having the same kind of the concern. And both India and Bangladesh term it's a threat to the national security. Bangladesh Prime Minister, for instance, categorically said that over 10 lakh Rohingyas who fled from Myanmar to our country in the wake of persecution is a threat to the security of the entire region, as she urged the global community to resolve the issue. So these were the appeal. This was the appeal made by Bangladesh Prime Minister. So let me discuss here that what kind of the things or what kind of the arrangements that we are seeing in terms of the international cooperation or international arrangement in terms of this refugee crisis of Rohingyas. When we are discussing the Rohingya issues, ultimately the principles of R2P, responsibility to protect, that was adopted by the United Nations in 2005, and that stipulates that the international community has a responsibility to protect people from crimes against humanity, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. And it was an idea that sought to overcome the shame and ignominy after the failure to halt the genocide in Rwanda and at Srebrenica during 1990s. And R2P was a collective commitment to end the politics of indifference and inaction once and for all. So the Article 3rd, it actually says that timely and decisive collective response is very much necessary. If any state is manifestly failing in its protection responsibilities, then a state should take collective action to protect the population. So keeping focus on this third pillar of R2P. So since its last 15 years of existence, R2P has appeared in more than 90 UN Security Council resolutions and leading the peacekeeping missions being deployed to protect civilians in places like Central African Republic, Sudan, South Sudan. And it also led to the controversial 2011 military intervention to halt atrocities in Libya. So there is no doubt that since the coup people in Myanmar, it was the crisis in 2017 and recently the coup in Myanmar, the people are facing potential crime against humanity and they deserve protection. So the security forces continue to use deadly force against the unarmed protesters. Recently, more than 400 people has been killed in this these protests, recent protests. And the current crisis in Myanmar has its origin in 2017 failure of the international community to hold the military accountable for that crime. So these are I will take two cases here, like this case of the Bangladesh Rohingyas and Burma's Rohingyas and Libya. So Libya was the first case where the Security Council authorized a military intervention during the I think 2011, I think. So they're citing it as a need of R2P. So the following widespread and systematic attacks against the civilian population by the Libyan region led by Gaddafi, the Security Council unanimously adopted a resolution. The resolution was resolution number is 1970 in 2011, making explicit reference to the R2P and deploring what it called the gross and systematic violation of the human rights. And the Security Council demanded an end to the violence. So recalling the Libyan authorities' responsibility to protect its population and imposed a series of international sanctions also. So the Council also decided to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court. So in resolution, later in the resolution 1973, it was adopted in March 2011. The Security Council demanded an immediate ceasefire in Libya, including an end to the ongoing attacks on civilians, which it said might constitute a crime against humanity. So the Council authorized member states to take all necessary measures to protect the civilians in Libya. And soon after some days, NATO planes started striking at Gaddafi's forces, and NATO subsequently came under scrutiny for its behavior during the air strikes. It concerns including the fact that the intervention quickly moved to the regime change rather than to protect the civilians. And that were the aerial bombardment that also caused the civilian casualty there. So now let's discuss the Rohingya case under R2P. So the Security Council, they also met to discuss the situation. But here China and Russia, they blocked the release of a statement after the meeting was held on the Rohingya case. And in the end, the a kind of formality was made by an official response from the Security Council in a presidential statement that emphasized that it was the primary responsibility of the Myanmar government to protect its population. So this was a statement. And in 2018, the UN fact-finding mission on Myanmar concluded that senior members of the military, including General Heliang, the leader of the 1st February coup, that they should be prosecuted for genocide as well as the crime against humanity and war crimes committed in Rakhine, Kachin and Shan states of Myanmar. Again, China defended Myanmar's channels at UN Security Council and privately threatened to veto any resolution authorizing the international actions. And on March 28, the UN advisor on the prevention of genocide, Michelle Bachelet, released a joint statement saying that the international community has a responsibility to protect the people of Myanmar from the atrocity crimes. So there can be no doubt what is now happening in Myanmar, just as what happened with the military's assault on the Rohingyas in 2017 is unequivocally in violation of the responsibility to protect or Article principles unanimously adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2005. So here into two cases that we are seeing the difference that when we are taking the case of Libya, then the effort was solely on the regime change, and here that due to the failure of the world powers, those are responsible, especially P5, and they are the custodian, and they are always talking of the peace and security, and they are having a special privileges in the United Nations. They threatened to use the veto in this case. So the intentionally of the genocide and human rights abuse that was not seen as a grave threat for the humanitarian intervention for protection of the right of Rohingyas in Myanmar. As a result, South Asian region was become the victim on non-traditional security threat due to the ineffectiveness of the world bodies and misuse of power by the P5. And the outcome of this failure of this humanitarian disaster, like about 1 million people, both refugees and local community members, they need humanitarian assistance. The Myanmar and Bangladesh governments, they failed to negotiate terms of the repatriation of Rohingya refugees to Myanmar. In the meantime, the children's in the camps, they need access to formal education, are being trafficked for sex. That recent report by the BBC, I must quote here that the girls aged from 10 year to 20 years, they are in the high demand in the brothel in Bangladesh, and in the tourism sector also, these are the high demands of those girls, and there was a undercover reporters for that matter, and they covered the whole matter, and this matter came to the light. So these kind of the atrocities and these kind of the things are happening with Rohingya refugees. So the challenges for Rohingyas now remain, they are still stateless without legal right and protection, and Rohingya children and families are vulnerable to the human trafficking, child labor, child marriage, gender-based violence, and other forms of the exploitation of abuse. And they are also very vulnerable for being used by terrorist organizations operating in South Asia, and it will have a direct kind of the implication on peace and security in South Asia. Now the Indian concerns are that since Rohingya refugees, India is having a long border with Myanmar, India is having 1600 kilometer border land frontier with Myanmar, and India considers Rohingya as a threat to national security. So Rohingya have entered in India from Bangladesh, especially from the Indian state of West Bengal, and have spread it all over the country, and most of them roaming freely and have got the key identification documents through fraud and deceit. And there is a strong opposition in India and concerns in India that for Rohingyas, as intelligence agencies have found some linkages with the terrorist organizations and other illegal activities. So some political parties see it as a threat of demographic changes, and in recently concluded West Bengal elections, assembly elections, that illegal migration and shield by the state government, these were the accusation by other parties. So after several criticism in October 2018, Indian authorities started repatriating Rohingya refugees to Myanmar, and these were the subject to the criticism. I already told you that by the UNHRC and other bodies. So, and Indian Supreme Court also, this case was gone to Indian Supreme Court, and it is still there. So these kind of the concern India have Bangladesh also is having the same concerns. But the matter is that how the response in the two cases, when we are talking of the cases of, for instance, Libya, then we are comparing with the case of Myanmar. So you can see the kind of the biasness and the kind of the non-seriousness of the regional powers or the world powers to solve the issue of the Rohingyas, for instance, because this Rohingya issue, that since in this pandemic, this issue is also, you know, that since the vaccination drives are going on in South Asia and all part of the world, and still there is a shortage of vaccine in India. And if you are leaving, because for vaccination, you need a kind of documentation or kind of the identification as a citizen. If you are not going to get this kind of the identification or the ID, then you are not subject to provide the facility of the vaccination. So in this case, if this kind of the large population residing in South Asia, especially in India and Bangladesh, if they are being left for the vaccination, then what will be the case with the other people? Because there is a mobility, people are roaming around here and there. So this is a one concern also. So these kind of the concerns are at high, you know, that these kinds of the, it's warning signals for the security of the people of South Asia as well as India and Bangladesh. So here the cases like this indicates that how these international bodies, they have failed to undertake the very serious issue. Those are having implications on the health of the people. Those are having implications on the security and other aspects. So by this, I will, since I think I have taken 9 or 10 minutes already, so I'm stopping my presentation here, and I would love to take questions and further discussions after that. Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity and the nice for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Aslam, for highlighting such a special case that is not just the concerns for Bangladesh and India or South Asia, but it's also to Thailand and the whole of Southeast Asia as well. Because in Thailand we have such a long border with Myanmar, and then also the sea routes from they come to Thailand as well. And you have raised such a lot of information, important questions that should be discussed later on, such as who's going to involve in solving this conflicts in this threats, and how is it going to end, but that will be discussed later on. For the next speakers, Dr. Chandra Lavande is already here, so may invite him to present his view on the topic. Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Pandey.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Thank you very much. Namaste to all, and thank you very much for nice to organize this program, and particularly Pramod Jaiswal. Today, our three speakers, they spoke on different topics. For example, first three speakers focused on non-traditional issues, and then the immediate speaker focused on refugee issue. But I'm trying to talk on a different issue today. In my own understanding, this non-traditional security topic itself is very broad, actually. It encompasses almost everything apart from military, right? Therefore, today in my talk, I'll focus more about what do we mean by green governance, sustainable development, because I believe sustainable development and sustainability, these terms are becoming security issue today, right? And what's the Nepal take on it? And this is a part of this, actually this talk is part of a chapter that I submitted to Institutes of Foreign Affairs here in Nepal, and that was launched by our Prime Minister just yesterday. So a part of this book, actually. And when we talk about, as I said, non-traditional issue, a lot of things there, for example, erosion, desertification, acidification, waste, chemical, e-waste, environmental degradation, biodiversity issue, and then the burning issue of climate change, right? All these things, even unemployment, right? Drug, human trafficking, these all issues come within the topic. So I think in one sitting, we cannot talk of everything. Therefore, I would more focus on, certain issues on it, and then what's the take of Nepal in terms of development. If you look at global literature, you can see that scientists, they agree that, non-traditional security challenges are rising, right? It's kind of anthropogenic ecosystem degradation is happening all over the world. And this is the emerging security, because everywhere you can see that people are talking about natural disasters. And in Nepal also, we have a number of natural disasters every year. Immediately, a few days back, we had a big flood here because of prolonged rains, and a number of people, they lost their life. And we have a, let's say, huge toll of human life as well as losses of property. So what you can see is that, when we are talking about environmental degradation, we are talking about a number of security issues there. For example, water security, we are talking about food security issue there. We are talking about health system security. We are talking about economic security. We are also talking about whole this social system fabric security issue also, right? And these are very complicated issues. They cannot be easily dealt with, in fact. And apart from that, if you look at this, international relations literature, you can see that North-South politics is always complicating it. The position of North, looking at certain issues, for example, climate change, let's say, and then Southern scholars and Southern countries' perspective on climate change issue. Who is going to actually shoulder the burden of addressing climate change itself? That's just one issue, an example I want to share with you. And we have been heard about it ever since after 1960s. We have been hearing that, well, okay, we need to address these issues, and particularly after 1987 with the publication of Our Common Future from the Blunt Commission, we heard about this 3E: equity, economy, environment, right? But if we come today and look back, we can see that most often it has been just lip service only of the governments. Actuality, in reality, we don't see quite a lot of performance being done by governments of the world. In this backdrop, what I want to talk about is that development and security approaches, they need to revisit themselves, and the plans and policies, they must integrate in the interest of sustainability through green governance. Okay, that's what I would like to argue. And when you talk about sustainable development, there is one classic definition, that is development that meets the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, right? That's the classic definition. It means anything to everybody, right? You can define in the way you want, right? If you are in a business and if you continue the business of cutting forests, that is sustainable development, maybe. For an environmentalist, protecting the forest can be sustainable development, right? Again, it's not very clear. But then when you look at a number of literature, what you see is that sustainable development always keeps a human being at the center, not the nature. Okay, human being is always at the center of the universe. That's what we see, right? And then if that is so, again, you can see inconsistency there, right? Because this is the definition. And if that is, if human being is at the center, what you can see is that still in poor countries, there are a number of people who are not able to meet the basic needs. If human beings at the center, that could have been met actually, right? But that is not happening. And what you can see is that quality of life of many people in developing world, in less developed countries, is not actually improving. Rather, what you see is the gap between rich and poor people, it is getting increased, right? So these are some of the important things we need to think about. And at the same time, what you see that in this Anthropocene, because of this overexploitation of natural resources, what you can see is, on the one hand side, there are people who are pocket of influence people, very rich people. At the same time, we have pocket of, let's say, poverty, poor people. And this poor people is said to be, destroying environmental security for their livelihood. On the other hand, this pocket of influence people, they are exploiting environment and environmental security. They are destroying for being rich. Okay, there is contradiction. That's what we can see. And if you go beyond sustainable development, what you can see is that sustainability, it's a broad term actually. It goes beyond environmental, let's say, sustainability only, right? You can see that also. So what I think is that, we can have very good use of science to ensure adaptive management of scarce resources. Probably we can achieve then sustainability, right? And addressing sustainability needs proper governance structure, deep development designs, which are very green, through green governance to maintain harmony between human and nature, right? That's what I think about. And when you look at the literature of green governance, it's a very novel topic. It's very, very new topic, which is, emerging in literature now. Green governance is a response to mounting calls for a paradigm shift in the way humans relate to natural environment. Green governance can be the engine of micro principles and policies for the state, internal governance, the market, and the legal institutional structures for shared management of ecological resources. Okay, and there are few key principles. For example, one is that all levels of development decision making and actions need to embed the environmental considerations. Cities and communities and social, cultural, economic, political life need to be considered as a subset of the environment, not superior to the environment, as a subset to the environment. Emphasis on the inalienable nexus for coexistence of people and the ecosystem, and promoting the transition from open-loop cradle-to-grave systems like garbage disposal with no recycling to closed-loop cradle-to-cradle systems like permaculture to zero waste strategies, right? So those are the things that we need to consider when we talk about green governance. But if you talk about, the framework, what you see is that four things very, very important. One is theory. Okay, in terms of theories, what you can see is scarcity and carrying capacity, externality, and you can also see striking balance between 3 E's and self-governance also. So these are aspects of theories of green governance. And mode, in terms of mode, you can see some open new innovations, low carbon economy, low carbon technology, and self-reliant communities, not dependent communities, rather self-reliant communities. And mechanism, how do you, bring those things into mainstream? So what you do is that administrative mechanism, economic mechanism, social mechanism, and synergetic mechanism. So these are the means, right? And subjects could be, I discussed some time ago, it can be like energy, agriculture, climate change, all these can be subjects. Now, with this background, now I want to come to Nepali case, actually, what are the challenges in terms of, let's say, sustainable development or green governance for Nepal? If you look, Nepal is 49th largest country in population and 93rd largest country in the area occupied. But at the same time, it's one of the most, disaster-prone countries in the world. You must have heard about earthquakes, flood, landslides, all different types of disasters, lightning, right? All these. It borders with India in, let's say, south, east, and west, and China in the north, and it does not have direct access to sea also. And if you look about, the sustainability or security challenges, then you can see that still, Nepal has about 21% people who are below the poverty line. And then there are frequent natural disasters, urban air pollution, declining water resources, and overall environmental degradation. And you can see that there is, let's say, ripple effects of climate change, right? Climate change is connected with a number of things. For example, climate change in monsoon pattern, flood, right? And flood causes landslides, and then flood causes, sweeping away of cities, rural areas, and again, water-induced disasters. You can see these kinds of, let's say, ripple effects of climate change. Climate change is not just one. Okay, it's connected with agriculture. It's connected with livelihood also. And at the same time, you can see that in Nepal we have haphazard urbanization also, not planned, organized urbanization, but the way people want to build a house in cities, they're doing it. And then once houses are built, then they look for water services, they look for electricity services, they look for other services, and ultimately they don't have recreational place, they don't have public space, right? Those kinds of things. It's also a disaster, actually, that's happening in cities. And when you look at, the institutions, those mediums I discussed about green governance, you can see that most of our institutions, which exist here to address those kinds of things, there are serious challenges. For example, there is not inter-ministries coordination. You don't see interdepartmental coordination, right? What you see is that these ministries, I suppose that all in South Asia, not only in Nepal, that you can see that we have ministries. Environmental ministries does something else, and which are related with, let's say, development ministries also, but they are not connected, right? So you can see this kinds of institutional fragmentation here, and these things are not addressed. And the challenges of, let's say, human security, non-traditional security exist here. They keep boiling up. Now, in the case of Nepal, from this, let's say, green governance perspective, I think that there are a number of challenges for Nepal also. For example, energy security. Nepal is totally dependent on, let's say, hydrocarbon from other countries of the world. We don't have hydrocarbon here, right? No energy security here. And because of climate change, we are encountering new types of security challenges, for example, water and food, okay? At the same time, we have haphazard development also. So if Nepal really wants to move ahead, then in the national interest of Nepal, there are at least 4 things from my research, which I would like to say with you, that one is improve hydro energy sector and green technology. Number 2 is modernize agricultural practices for food security. Number 3, implement e-governance and digitalization. Number 4, planned urban and community development. Now, what do I mean by improve hydro energy sector and green technologies? That, Nepal has, plenty of rivers. We have about more than 6,000 river and rivulets here in Nepal, and we have capacity to produce about 43,000 hydroelectricity, right, in Nepal. But then until now, we've not even been able to produce around 1,500. They are in line, but we have not been able to do so. So a highly prioritized approach on hydroelectricity generation would enable Nepal to produce more clean and green energy to achieve a number of things. For example, it will reduce dependency on hydrocarbon imports. It will definitely save foreign reserves, leading to path towards a middle-income rich country. And use of hydroelectricity for transport, for mobility, industry, agriculture, and domestic use. And then reduced carbon emission through the use of green energy and technology. And now, agriculture. Nepal is said to be, an agricultural country. And if you look at the statistics, you can see that about 66% of people, they are involved in agriculture. But if you look at the GDP contribution, only about 28 and 29% of GDP is from agriculture. So there's a mismatch, right? And today you can see that a large number of, let's say, fields of Nepal, particularly in, let's say, hilly region, are barren, right? And when you talk to these farmers who work in these fields, then they keep complaining that even if sometimes they're not able to produce. And once they're able to produce, but they don't know how to market that. So our value chain system is not good. We often hear during the time of COVID-19 also, we get potatoes and all these cauliflowers and cabbage from India, but the produce of Nepal, they remain here in villages and then they just get rotten. Right, those kinds of things. So if we have this kind of, let's say, modernized agriculture system with very clear value chain mechanism, that can actually help address, let's say, farmers' issues also, problems also. And the next is, implementation of e-governance and digitalization. I think that's the most important thing today, because we have traffic jams in our cities, right? We consume a lot of, hydrocarbon, petrol, diesel when we travel from one place to another. So there are a number of things. For example, effective and efficient use of digital technology can substantially reduce traffic jams of megacities. Okay, health security, hydrocarbon security issues are there. Save considerable amount of time for obtaining services of clients, citizens. And eliminate the practice of middlemen and brokers also, because you directly get connected with government institutions. Eliminate corruption, as there is no direct contact between clients and public servants. Reduce the crowded queue system of Nepal, where Nepali clients suffer the most. And the last one is planned urban and community development. Urban and community development planning create norms and values and vision that capture the aspiration of both the government and the people. However, haphazard infrastructure systems are often the case of Nepal's urbanization and development process. So the collective vision of government and the people need to be contextualized, making sense of place and people, which is very, very important in terms of ownership and development. Locally embedded thinking in development can reflect fundamental aspects of green governance and sustainability. So emphasis must be on self-reliance, avoid chaotic development, and keep local aesthetics, land parcel development, ensuring good living, including possibility of local food production also. And if Nepali people, government of Nepal, leads the country to that direction, Nepal would be able to achieve, let's say, at least energy security, food security, water security, and some kinds of livelihood security of the people also. With this, I stop here. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'm very happy to respond. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pandey. Even though you have spoken specifically for the challenge for Nepal, but you have also highlight very important issues on non-traditional securities, including institutional fragmentations and the importance of contextualizations of the grand schemes. For our next speakers, may I invite Professor Dr. Nivedita Das Kundu to present her speech. Thank you.
Well, hi, can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I am presently presenting this paper from Toronto, where it's early morning today, Saturday early morning. Well, I'm a little unwell because I just got my COVID-19 second dose. So I was having high fever, so I could not join early morning, but I hope I will be able to present the paper. And thanks to Dr. Pandey, it was very informative about the climate change, and we learned a lot. Also, I would like to mention that through this online conclave, I could meet online so many our ex-colleagues from IDSA, friends from JNU. So thanks to Dr. Jaswal and his team of NICE for organizing this excellent conclave. And also must mention that Bharat Center of Canada in Toronto are extremely happy and honored to be part of this conclave as one of the partners. And for last 2 days, it has been going on excellently. And we definitely hope that the third day will be also very good and then come out with a fantastic publication, policy recommendations, so which we are eagerly waiting for. Thank you, Dr. Sinthuphan, for chairing the session. And I would like to keep on time, but still, if I exceed, please tell me. Well, as you must be aware that a lot of books on COVID-19 and issues and concerns have come out. Dr. Pandey just now showed his recent publication. From our institute, also, our institute, which is also a policy think tank, we come out with a lot of publications, and our recent 2 publications, one is edited by me, it is on COVID-19 impact on education and beyond. And another one is COVID-19 analyzing the threat. So if you get chance, please go through them. So here, today, I would like to express my thanks once again. And my paper is basically on e-learning. Being a teacher, we have faced a lot of problems during this pandemic time, as everybody aware of. So what is the e-learning and educational institution, how they coped up during the pandemic, and also how we feel that this hybrid model is going to continue for some more time, as well as in some places also going to be a kind of a practice. So as we know that COVID-19 pandemic has created the biggest disruption of education system that history has ever recorded. Closure of schools and other learning spaces have impacted hugely on the world student population. The crisis is exacerbating earlier education disparities by sinking the opportunities for many of the most vulnerable children, youth, and adults. Those living in poor or rural areas, special needs students, to continue this learning process became even more difficult. The paper contributes to the debate on experiences during the pandemic and education disruption and local and global responses. The COVID-19 crisis and the unparalleled education disruption is, we all know that it is far from over. So how the situation has been taken care of and what is the way forward? The paper provides various methods of teaching and learning during pandemic. Also, the paper is, I must mention, written based on the practical experiences, assessing the teaching and learning situation basically in the 3 different countries, and that is one Canada, one India, and one is Russia. So there's a saying by Victor F. Frankl that when we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So here we have seen during the pandemic, this is pretty appropriate, and everybody is changing and trying to adopt this new normal situation. So education, as we know, is not only a fundamental right, but it is a key driver of sustainable development and progress. When education system breaks down, then the growth and peace cannot be sustained in the society. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the world into the deepest global recession in living memory that will have lasting effect on people's life and in education sector. There was a huge loss in the learning process, and that might continue for a longer period than expected and affect the progress. Millions of children and youth from pre-primary to tertiary may drop out or not have access to schools in the next year or so due to pandemic's economic slowdown. Similarly, disruption in the education process will have substantial effects beyond the education sector too. Closure of the educational institutions also obstructed the provision of important services to children and communities. As the health crisis unfolded, causing massive disruption, education system around the world will shift to react and adapt. Most of the government responded quickly to ensure education continues and protect the safety of learners by closing schools and other learning spaces, and e-learning or online learning became the new normal during this pandemic. Though educational institutions were not prepared to convert into the complete digitization, technology gradually became the only solution in this black swan situation to overcome the volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity. The disruption caused by COVID-19 in everyday life meant that millions of children worldwide have missed a stimulating and enriching environment, learning opportunities, social interaction, and in some cases, adequate nutrition through the daily snacks and food that is provided in many educational institutions were missing. This is likely to compromise their long-term healthy development, especially those children from poor and disadvantaged families. In technical and vocational education and training system, vulnerabilities including low level of digitization and long-standing structural weaknesses have been brought to light by the crisis. The digital gap and disruption in workplaces made it difficult to implement internship training co-ops options. In the higher education, while online learning or e-learning has generally taken place through recorded lectures and online platforms, some universities have postponed learning and teaching until further notice due to the lack of information and communication technology infrastructure for both students and teachers. During the pandemic time, international organizations we have seen, they also fell apart. Instead of pursuing a collaborative approach to coping with the pandemic, they developed many differences. We saw between WTO, WHO, UN. So they all became very fragmented. In an era where countries are increasingly drawn into an international system of exchanges referred to as globalization, the COVID-19 pandemic paradoxically is increasing the gap between developed and developing nations. Leaders of most countries were overwhelmed with the unexpected pandemic crisis and to date are struggling to deal with the ripple negative upshots. The pandemic has also made countries to realize the necessity to reduce defense budget and rather focus more on health and education sectors. Technology has become the most favorable option in the pandemic-stricken world, with digital practices moving towards e-governance, e-learning, etc., to create a better technology-driven world. And we are also today using that. So we are thankful to a certain extent. But yes, there are a lot of pros and cons. The paper mentioned how the educational institutions got severely affected, how they were abruptly closed without transition period to migrate to online classes. It has been observed that in some countries, national television and radio stations were used for educational purposes. Virtual classrooms and online platforms like Zoom interaction with students through Moodle, Scribble, Big Blue Button, Google Classroom, etc. became standard teaching methods. As the learning process continued through various e-learning methods, some students were fast to cope up, whereas some faced difficulties in adapting to the new methods of learning. This is because not all students have the access to technology and gadgets for online classes. In some countries, provincial and federal government, say, for example, in Canada, provided the students with facilities with a high-speed internet connection, laptops, tablets, and even online videos, documentaries, and audio files in different languages to make the online study possible and affordable to all. Nonetheless, it was not the same for all the students who concentrate through e-learning. Self-motivated students mainly managed to succeed, but many also face difficulties. Overall, all the countries tried their best through various mechanisms and various degrees of success to ensure that their education is reached to significant number of students in order to continue learning with within the home atmosphere unperturbed. Analysis of the learning situation during the COVID-19 shows that students' social skills were affected. However, the ability to work towards resilience and cooperation between the teacher and student increased. The paper also mentioned that COVID-19 pandemic is creating challenges in the teaching and learning process. It equally ignites innovative reforms in the education system for better and increasing technology use. In higher education institutions, the move to distance learning has been the opportunity to expand flexible learning modalities, setting the stage for a sustained shift towards more online learning in the future. Today, the world is experiencing challenges where century-old chalk and duster are not the way of teaching, and digital learning has evolved as a practical option. The paper highlighted the fact that demand and criteria are not the same in every level of the education system. For example, the elementary section aims to teach students behavioral education and focuses on group activities to imbibe good behavior in students like discipline, friendship, harmony. Many elementary schools also try to develop leadership skills, bilingual proficiency, ethics, spirituality, and national identity. Though the online study program, through this online program, these essential aspects many times we have seen are missing. The paper articulated that online classes cannot be taken as an absolute measure in place of physical classes. So definitely hybrid mode is much better than a total online. During the pandemic time, all are trying to adopt to their new ways and methods, but ongoing struggle for existence and survival for the fittest is continuing. The argument given in the paper that though it is understandable that online education cannot be adopted as a best option replacing physical teaching, but for the time being, it is a most favored option. It has been pointed out that the present situation taught us how to handle any similar crisis if required in the future, as many viable methods and options were learned during this pandemic time. This research paper also touched upon the aspect that to maintain the continuity in the learning process, many universities, colleges, institutes started holding regular online conferences and webinars, free literature from different countries, libraries, and online lectures from different universities are regularly being shared with the students. It has been noted that the teachers in various education sectors are regularly helping students to motivating them in different ways to maintain the positive attitude. A regular interaction with the students are taking place to avoid isolation as boost up their motivational level. Now, students and teachers collaboration showed a new approach to this relationship during this pandemic. The pandemic taught digital education has a good chance of growth and provide an opportunity for many countries to speed up the digitization process and increase the accessibility and affordability of reliable high-speed internet facilities. The paper also mentioned that some teachers feel that online teaching is causing adverse impact among the teachers community too. For example, going through regular online assignments and preparing for pre-recorded study material made their job more time consuming and sometimes tedious. Because of the lack of the direct personal feedback from the students, the motivational level for teaching is going down for many teachers as the classroom atmosphere is different from the virtual atmosphere. Though online teaching and learning became essential, many departments like medical studies and other lab-oriented studies face problems continuing through the online study for extended period. Online teaching is suitable mainly for the theoretical teaching and learning, but it is not a viable option for practical classes. And paper also highlights that younger population is in the advantageous position than the older generation, as older generation are comparatively less tech savvy. So therefore, we have seen that many adult education programs had to be cancelled during this pandemic time. So the overall, the paper touched upon the various methods and options of teaching and learning during the pandemic time, providing insight into the reality. So if you want to know more, of course, I'm here to answer the questions, as well as I'll share my this book, which is very much focused on education and how teaching and learning was adopted in various countries. So can concern this book also. So with these words, I would like to thank you. Thank you, Chair, for giving me time, and thank you for all your patience.
Oops. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kundu, for speaking on the topic that is, very close to us, who is working at the, within the university and the teaching systems. And well, you have mentioned, the topics that's one of the questions, from the floor, has just highlighted that, for we have been speaking of about non-traditional securities, but in terms of technology and cyber securities, and we haven't touched upon that just yet. And from the floor, there are some concerns and interests and how are we going to tackle that problems, whether there is a policy or frameworks that we can use to address these issues.
Well, I just want to highlight one example, that is in York University, when the initial pandemic started and this online program started and online education started, then the whole server was hacked. So after that, they became very cautious, and all the universities, they are kind of following different kind of protocols, different methods to tackle these kind of issues. And of course, that cybersecurity is a major concern nowadays. So that is definitely being looked into when they're going more into that, because when they started initially, they were not ready, as I mentioned, and also they were not very sure that how long will this continue. Nobody knew that it will continue for almost 2 years. So they were not prepared that way. So, but then when people saw that it's the only option, in Canada, only online education, starting from the school to university, has been continuing, and people are got used to it. But in Russia, it is a little different. In India, in rural areas, it is different. So yes, people started adapting to this new reality and learned that this is also one of the good options when if it is required. And hybrid model, that has become a norm now. And we hope that that is going to continue, maybe 3 days in a class and 2 days online. That is now increasing.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other speakers who want to address these issues of technology? Well, okay, Dr. Pandey, please.
I think if you talk about cybersecurity, it's becoming a very big issue. It's not recent. It's not with COVID-19. It was already there, in fact, right? It was already there. I remember when I was doing my PhD in New Zealand at the time, this issue was very broad issue. And students were working on cybersecurity at the time also. But particularly if you talk about COVID-19 situation, how we are handling this in Kathmandu University in Nepal is that, particularly I use Google Meet. Actually. I don't use Zoom myself. I use Google Meet. And I invite only my students with their email ID so that nobody else can enter into that conversation or session. Okay, that's how I've been doing it for the last 2 years, right? And interestingly, what Professor said just now, for example, I also wrote a chapter from my own experience because I train faculty members here with, let's say, Google Meet and Moodle system, right? And the book is Exploring the Consequences of the COVID-19 Pandemic, and it's going to be published by AAP Press. It's a CRC Press in 2022, January. And my topic was on school and university closures in COVID-19, impact on educational processes and systems, right? And when I was talking on that, particularly in the context of Nepal, in let's say digital divide is there, as you mentioned rightly, right? Digital divide is there. And we have people with access to technology, access to internet, right? And they may be living in cities and they are able to join classes. But in remote places, students are not able to do that. And particularly if you look at university, students are able to join classes because they can concentrate, undergraduate students, master's students. But if you look about, this, let's say pre-primary, student and primary student and high school student, it's very difficult to hold them in the classroom actually, right? And in my research also, I found that at least, we need to have 4 pillars there. One is, first of all, we need to have, access to technology itself, and then machine, and then environment, home environment. Like I'm working from home now. My daughter can come into this room any minute and say, "Daddy," like this, and make a noise, disturb, right? And mind preparation of student, right? So these are some of the important things that universities, at the same time, at home, parents, they need to prepare so that students can have good class. But still, there will remain this digital divide. Thank you.
One more thing I just want to add here, that UNICEF came out with a very good report, and if you see that in the developing countries and also in the rural areas, there are incentive to go to school because they get good food, they get nutrition from the food from the schools. So these all things stopped, and also of course meeting their peers, interacting with them regularly. So the mental health was also drastically affected, not only mental health of the students, but also we found that in the research that mental health of the parents and the whole family got severely affected. And in Canada, we have seen that a lot of pressure faced by big families, and they were treated for the mental depression and mental health issues. And in developing countries, this food and going to the school, this also got affected.
Yeah, well, I think it's not just developing country, because it's because the problems are always also surfaces in the United Kingdoms and in the United States as well. Because a lot of low-income families had to depend on the school meals to survive. Yeah, and Dr. Jyoti, you want to speak to add something?
There is, a very good insight on cybersecurity and international relations has been given in the Carnegie Endowment Report for International Peace. And this report was published by the Oxford University Press. So if you want to go to details of cybersecurity and international relations, I think this is one of the reports which has nailed it.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to one. I think it's one last question. Well, the question is actually asking about specifically about energy securities, but I would like to reframe it also in terms of in a broader sense of non-traditional securities. Whether there is a missing link between the states, the grounds, and all the transnational actors, and how can we resolve these problems? Dr. Jyoti, have
to create an effective energy policy is very hard. It's very hard. International coordination is going to be very difficult to create an effective, and I underline the word effective, energy policy. The transnational politics of energy, again, I would refer to a paper written by an international theorist, Robert Kwan and David G. Victor. They have written a paper on the transnational politics of energy, and this was published by Princeton University, if I'm not wrong, wherein they highlighted this. They said that the national interests are better aligned when you focus the energy issues in smaller areas, for example, regional collaborations, rather than international collaboration at the outset. So if you have focused energy policy with regard to one particular area of your energy and focus in a small region, that would perhaps be more effective rather than having an overall international energy policy. The guidelines can be for every country. Fair enough. The foundational logic can be for every country. But till you have focused energy policy for a particular region, because each region is different, you can't have a policy, energy policy of America planted on the energy policy of India or South Asia for that matter. So one has to, for example, the European Union Commission, they have agreed to reduce the emissions by 80% by the year 2030. So we need guidelines like this. We need specific instructions like this, which we have not done in South Asia. Again, I keep falling back to South Asia because European Union has just 1/5 of the world's energy consumption, but yet it has taken upon itself to reduce the emissions by 80% by 2030. What has South Asia done with respect to that? So I think it is time now for academics like us, for think tanks like us, for people like you and me to frame out with policies which give concrete instructions to the region as to how to have an effective energy policy. I'll rest my case here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Aslam, do you have any views on these matters of conflicting institutions?
Thank you.
In regards of Rohingya issue as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I will make little mention of this cyber security issues, since that some mechanism were asked for the cyber security. I can see in the chat box that since for a fruitful outcome, the priorities of the organizations or the countries should include a proactive plan for each kind of enterprise or each kind of the business or the institution to build and maintain its own cyber security workforce first. And with security expertise, it's becoming so difficult to source and retain. So organizations or the institutions, they should consider cultivating this talent organically. Then organizations must also recognize that mobility is implicit in modern technology workforce. I must say that it will be important to plan for the expected tenure of experienced professionals and recognize the long-term benefits that will accrue from a reputation for cultivating this expertise and transmit it from the veterans to newcomers entering in the field. And the other kind of the mechanism can also take in care. It's a kind of the global policy also for the this cyber security, and it needs some kind of that refinement. Since we are already having a mechanism for cyber security, but we are frequently seeing some cases of its breach also, that frequently we are seeing that this defense ministry, this Indian sites or some other sites has been hacked, and some kind of the and during since we were discussing of these lectures and education system during the pandemic, and I see some of the programs, some nude kind of the pictures, videos were surfaced. So these this need a kind of the strong security mechanism, and I focused on the indigenous kind of the development of their own cyber security infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think that. Well, the next questions. Medha, are you still with us? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Well, the next questions is addressing to you, because you're talking about non-traditional, non-Western epistemologies of international relations and also in terms of securities. And my question is, how can we as a group of academias or as an active citizens can help promote this different alternative ideas to the power that be, and turn it into policy. Mm-hmm.
So a couple of questions there. Maybe after I respond to your questions, I'll also share my thoughts on them. But One of the main arguments, I think, which I was really trying to communicate when thinking about non-traditional security is to really go beyond the binary, beyond a compartmentalized siloed zone. I really talked about the meta-narrative and the micro-narrative and how there is really a growing distance between, say, what is really negotiated at the international level, what is said at the international level, and how it's really translated down to the local level, or what is really negotiated at the bilateral level, and what really are the realities really on the micro level, at the local level. So, now, when we're really looking at international relations today, of course, you would recognize that it's not just dominated by a set of actors, states as primary actors. Definitely, there is a primacy of state actors, but well, there are other actors too, particularly when we are really talking about non-governmental organizations. We're talking about these non-state actors, the international non-governmental organizations, the hybrid organizations like IUCN, the local collectives. And I think, when you're really talking about the participation of the people, I think what is really needed is to really upscale some of these local issues, to the bilateral level. And how do you really do that? I think as students of international relations, we really need to move beyond theory, which really revolve around critical security, which talk about human security or water security, borrowing, say, from a Copenhagen school or, say, from a critical security school. What we really need to do is to really have a much more multi-scalar analysis in terms of looking at, how do policies articulated at the bilateral level, are really translated down, and what are the felt needs, how do the felt needs of the people at the local level, how can really they be upscaled to bilateral level. And I think it's here that a whole set of new actors really become important. There is a need for a new imagination in terms of a more networked approach, how really networks operate in international relations, and how, that itself can help facilitate this idea of non-traditional security in much more, I would say, in much more nuanced and effective ways. And it's really been happening across. In fact, I think, if you look at South Asia, even if you look at Southeast Asia, there are a couple of these non-governmental actors, these spaces, which are in fact, becoming very effective. The other, I think, interesting question, which was really on the energy security, I think, it was really a nail on the head. Because when we talk about energy security, for instance, again, say, in a regional context like South Asia, it might run contrary to, say, ecological security. I mean, for instance, take the case of South Asia. You need hydropower. And when I'm talking about energy security, let me talk about hydropower here. But at the same time, if you build dams, you also know that the entire belt in Eastern South Asia is a highly seismic zone. So if you build in dams, and if there are, hazards, actually it will lead to debris, it will lead to avalanche, it will actually endanger human security. And again, I would say that, that's what really been my own endeavor towards really bridging the diplomacy and the governance gap. The person was talking about energy security, and if you look at, some of these emerging debates, particularly I would say the water, food, energy, climate change nexus approach, which some scholars really have been talking about, in terms of not really looking at water as water security or energy as energy security, but really trying to look at the sectoral interdependencies between all, and whether they can really be a co-benefit approach, sort of emerging out of that. I think that is what is really needed when we are really talking about, when you're talking about energy security. Because, given the very strategic construct of South Asia, if you talk about water, it will be a non-starter in negotiations. So you need to really broaden your frames, and I think that is what is needed. On cybersecurity, I think, again, there was a question, and I think this gentleman had talked about multilateral institutions, coming to the fore and talking about cybersecurity. Well, I would say that given the very complex world that we are living in, if you look at Russia's own take on cybersecurity, if you look at China's own take on cybersecurity, the issue of sovereignty is really coming to the fore. And, how are these nations really defining sovereignty? And therefore, I think, rather than having a normative approach, what is really needed within states also to really rethink some of these issues. say for a country like India, if one has to think about cybersecurity, which of course is a very important issue in the coming years, one has to think of a more integrated, coordinated approach. It shouldn't be like only siloed, compartmentalized approach, like I think one of my co-panelists was talking about. It happens when you're actually drafting energy policies or water policies. The same really goes to cybersecurity. So I would say that, given the very complex world we are living in, we need to really think about governance and diplomacy, and then really strike a balance between some of these wicked problems, I think, which we witness in the 21st century.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we have no more questions, but we have some times left. So would like to invite all of our speakers to say just a few last words, just to emphasize your points, or to inspire our audience on the topics of this non-traditional security issues. May I invite Dr. Das first?
Oh, you talk to me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I would just like to say that South Asia presents a unique case wherein regional cooperation on non-traditional security issues are natural unifiers, because they have a naturally geographical connect. So South Asia presents a unique case wherein regional cooperation on non-traditional security issues are natural binders, natural unifiers, but the catch is here. But the political will, which is lacking, remains the main obstacle in countering non-traditional security threats in the region. And till such time we have a comprehensive whole of the government or whole of the regional approach to non-traditional security issues, I don't think we have a very bright future with regard to policy framework of non-traditional security threats countering our nation. So I think the sooner we realize, the better it is, not only for our region, but also for the world. With that, I rest my case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Das. Should I do?
Well, I think very well said already by everyone. So the last speaker just explained it so well, and I do agree on that. And yes, but yes, basically we have to understand that how to reduce the gap between the developed and developing nations. So that is where we have to understand, and what are the challenges, because a lot of time we face that divide, very huge divide, and that is where we have to understand, and we have to work closely with everybody. That's like recently G7 summit concluded. So we saw that how the divide is increasing. So that is how, as far as I'm concerned, sitting in this Western nation. So I feel that there's a huge gap, and that is what we have to make them understand, and that is where we can work together.
Okay. Dr. Pandey?
Okay, thank you. Right. I think we have already discussed quite a lot of things, and this non-traditional security is very much fascinating topic, I think, all the time, because we can talk about everything, almost everything, right? Everything comes under it. It's a very fascinating topic, right? That's the one thing. For example, we were talking about cyber security, we were talking about energy security, and there are different perspectives we can use to look at it again. For example, when I have to look myself, this energy security, I look from very different perspective, because I come from this climate change background. And for me, if I look at the world, I can see that still almost 80 to 81%, world is being fueled by coal. And I live in between India and China. Now, when you talk about cooperation, what kind of cooperation? I sit down here and think that, okay? And I've recently been working with this transboundary water governance. Also, it's funded by ICIMOD's project, right, for the last 3-4 years. And I can see a number of challenges in terms of water, also transboundary water governance between Nepal, India, and Bangladesh again. Somewhere upper riparian right, somewhere, lower riparian right, all those kinds of things. And then again, when we talk about South Asia, SAARC, we have secretariat here in Kathmandu, and it is slipping there. It's completely inactive, right? And in such situation, we have plenty of topics, fertile topics here to deal with, right? For example, energy security, maybe we need to move beyond this traditional type of dirty fuels to a much more renewable type of energy system then. There can be, good market, good availability of that. And you can see that China has been able to do almost 40% of its energy from renewable sources. India can practice that, and we can definitely benefit in between. That may be a cooperation over the speed of something, right? So that's a very important thing we need to consider. And then if we really want to have this South, let's say, Asian cooperation, at that time, I think we need to think about our issues, and I think our attitude should be, our approach should be very much innovative. Because we need to understand the challenge. We can simply say that, well, it's realism, well, it's institutionalism or liberalism. We can say those kinds of things, define. But on what issues India and China, India and Pakistan, sit together and discuss, right? Which country can be a neutral, let's say, platform to bring all these different countries and have a conversation on it to address those issues. I think those are also important areas we can think of, right? Environment, security, cyber security, energy security. So it's a very fascinating, let's say, topic for students of international relations. And as you keep working, you understand better, right? The more you study, you will understand better, and you can figure out yourself, what does it mean to you also? That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Aslam.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will add some more with reference to the migration and all that, since we are seeing that in the last speakers and some questions were raised on the cyber security. So I will mention here the terrorism and violent extremism is also affecting badly, not only South Asia, but other parts of the world. But here there is a mention here, then when we take the case of 9/11, for instance, that threat from this non-traditional security threat of terrorism that came into the forefront because the world's most powerful country was attacked and it couldn't defend. So that the question comes that the smaller countries like in South Asia, East Asia, and other parts of the world, they are also suffering from this menace since long time. And this terrorism and other kind of these kind of the threats are having its own roots, because in the containment time that America used some kind of the militia later on, and you can see the case of Taliban, for instance. After 9/11, Taliban was attacked in charge of having alliance with Al-Qaeda. But later on, the same Taliban, after the 2 decades, when this kind of the forces were not under control and US was failed to counter those kind of the threats, then they finally decided to pull out, and they make a kind of compromises from the same actors, they term as a terrorist and something like that. So these kind of the double standards in terms of that, if you are going to be effect, then you can attack any country, you can invade the sovereignty. But on the other hand, when the other countries, they are badly affecting the same kind of the meanings, that these are the different rules and regulations and norms for that matter. So one need to define a kind of the very comprehensive kind of, that pattern for the counter-terrorism. Then United Nations also, the countries with the veto power, they are having their own say, but the countries without veto power, they are having their own setbacks. So these kind of the things, this kind of the double standard, these kind of the discriminations, and these kind of this extreme realist politics that I must say it's beyond Machiavellian, or it's more of Hobbes. But here the factor comes that since we are talking of the non-traditional security issues, that migration issues, these countries are responsible for this kind of the biggest challenges of the migration, since the instability in the Yemen and Syria. These refugees are going to Europe, for instance. And here in this case, you want to say something?
Okay, Dr. Aslam, I need to stop you now, because
Okay, thank you.
Listen from Dr. Mehta's, and then you will
thank you.
Wrap up the sessions. Okay, Dr. Mehta, you want to say a few words?
I'll just, maybe wind it up. I know we're running late for the second session. I'd just like to say that, you cannot really deal with non-traditional security issues with traditional ways of doing diplomacy. And there is where I think alternative modes of thinking, ways of thinking, is needed. We've had these problems long before. But I think, if you really go with the idea of a Westphalian model, where states are really the primary actors, I don't think so we go far away, because most of the negotiations, most of the talks will actually be locked up, frozen up, I would say, in sovereignty bargains. And I think we don't really have to go far. South Asia is just an example of really looking at it. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Well, just as the last chair, the chair of the last session, just wrapped up her sessions, that the good sessions, is not about answering the questions, but to provide us with more questions to think about. And I think this session is very thought-provoking and very inspiring indeed. And so on behalf of our organizers, I would like to thank you all, our speakers, and the audience who joined this session. So thank you very much, and good luck to you all.
Thank you. It was a great session. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you all the speakers for joining in and being a part of this session. I directly hand over the session to Nimesh for the formal vote of thanks.
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we have come to the end of this session, we would like to express a sincere gratitude and thanks to the Chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. A sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, we must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention, and for making this session productive with your questions. Once again, we are truly honored to have you all with us today. Please do join us in the next session.